A very warm greetings, everyone. Welcome to the lecture of Introduction to Environmental Economics. And we have been doing these series earlier also. And under these, the earlier lectures, we had discussed environmental economics, in the meaning of environmental economics, significance of environmental economics, and the differentiation between the environmental economics, resource economics, ecological economics, their similarities, their overlappings, as well as their differences. Now, in this particular lecture, our learning objectives are to understand the quality of environment, to comprehend various types of pollution, to understand the sources of pollution, to know about ecosystem and natural environment, and also to know about the cost of environmental protection. What do you mean by quality of environment? How do you measure it? So, pollution problems are not only, they are not new to the mankind. These are records, they have records of Romans complaining about the stink of smoky chimneys. Even the pollution control laws in other parts of Europe date from the Middle Ages. Urban areas have adverse pollution problems primarily because there are large concentration of people. Urbanization and migration, as well as increasing density of population in the urban areas, they become the huge cause for pollution. People are associated with emissions. World now is no longer infinite compared to what the ability of people to pollute. So in 1960s and 70s, many people have been galvanized, and as long as the world becomes more and more populated and wealthier, it has been observed that the pressure on the environment is not only increasing, it is becoming very, very difficult to protect Earth's environment. We focus on four main categories of environmental problems. So these four categories of environmental problems are, they pertain to air pollution, water pollution, toxic emissions, and ecosystem health. So it is basically emissions are the byproduct of energy consumption. These are impurities in the fuels. They lead to emissions like sulfur dioxide and particulate matter. Burning of carbon-based fuels leads to emissions on the like oxidized carbon, and then carbon dioxide becomes the significant greenhouse gas. Since our atmosphere contains significant amount of nitrogen in addition to oxygen, burning of fuels inevitably leads to emissions of nitrogen. CFC, chlorofluorocarbons, they were invented by Thomas Migle in 1970s, and they were used in the ACs as aerosol spray propellants prior to 1980s. So tropospheric ozone is not only directly emitted from the fuel combustion, still it results chemically from high concentration of nitrogen dioxide fuel combustion, and organic vapors from the paint drying and gasoline evaporating, among other things, in the presence of sunshine. So air pollution can occur either in the urban areas or even in the regional rural areas. Air pollution is the worst form of in the urban areas. This is mainly because concentration of people in the area. So the density of people living in the area is very, very high in the urban areas, both as source of pollution directly or indirectly, and they become the victim of pollution as well. It leads to health problems then, such as sickness, physical irritation, reduced health performance, etc. Health is an important component of human capital, and once there is a damage done to the health, it becomes a cost to the whole economy. Urban air pollution also damages materials such as buildings, It increases the cost of maintenance of the entire city, such as increasing cleansing requirements, and degradation of aesthetic scenes and areas, since no one likes to live in a brown haze. So one can say that air pollution sources can be categorized into four broad categories: sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. At regional level, air pollution may damage crops. Regional level, we are basically referring to the agriculture areas and the remote areas where not much buildings and structures are there. Mainly, it is the agriculture land, crops which are grown. So, it hampers and damages crops to a large extent. Agriculture becomes greatly linked with the air pollution, impact of air pollution. Sulfur and carbon pollution can damage crops. Acid deposition in the regional becomes the regional problem in many of the areas. Then deposition of sulfur and nitrogen based acids can harm forests and the aquatic ecosystem completely. Regional haze from nitrogen and sulfur pollutants is a problem in the areas where we have less of rainfall. It is assumed that the rainfall purifies and vanishes and cleans away all the unwanted material around. However, with the areas we have less of rainfall, they get succumb to the problem of air pollution and acid rainfall. Carbon dioxide is a global pollutant, and that leads to heat trapping capacity of the atmosphere, leading to the global warming. Similarly, the second component of air pollution, source of air pollution, is sulfur dioxide emission and that in the Western Europe, North America, and the rest of the developed world have been the subject of significant worry and control over the past 2 decades. Sulfur dioxide has been particularly troubling the middle income countries such as Iran. With money income, the problem can be solved. However, for example, Japan is able to solve the problem. However, the suspended particulates, which are also called as soot, are worse in lower income countries, and they tend to lessen the problem, to be less of the problem as the income rises. So basically, countries which are low developed countries, they have a major challenge of removing this problem of air pollution. One major non-fuel proponent or the component of air pollution, which is considered as chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, which led to the depletion of stratospheric ozone layer. These substances are now primarily used in the refrigerators. So CFCs have been controlled in the theory by it is reported that by 1987 Montreal Protocol, it is reported that CFCs have now been controlled. These chemicals in 1995 dropped to 20% of the levels in 1986. So one can say that it has been successfully controlled. However, a significant problem is the emergence of black market in the illicitly produced CFCs, and there is a rapid increase in CFC use and production in the developing countries, in the developing worlds. It is the result of organic material that causes the water pollution. So this was all about the air pollution. Now we concentrate on the another aspect of environment quality, which is water pollution. It is the result of organic material decomposition in the waterways or lakes that creates a problem of water pollution. Organic waste needs oxygen to decompose. One of the measure of quantity of pollution is biological oxygen demand, BOD, referred to as BOD. And oxygen is also essential for the fish and the other species to survive, which are under the water, which live under the water body. Therefore, in high BOD, biological oxygen demand, the water body becomes depleted of oxygen and no longer supports life. In addition, with oxygen depleted, decomposition is now from the anaerobic bacteria which do not require oxygen. However, such a decomposition which is by anaerobic bacteria, it tends to be very, very odoriferous. A major type of organic waste is a human waste, which we all know, which involves a significant human pathogens. Related to this only, the World Bank indicates that 18% of the world's population did not have access to the improved drinking water supplies. Child mortality rate is less correlated with the income, GDP per capita, than with the population access to the safe drinking water and to proper sanitation services. So one can see the difference, that it is causing the human loss and loss of life, that is child mortality rate, and which is no more linked with the income. So it is basically the facility and the quality of environment we are living in. For example, water, quality of water. So it leads to the loss of life. At the same time, water contamination by pathogen is probably the primarily environmental threat in most of the world. Pollution of groundwater is a major concern as far as the water pollution is concerned. Now, one should understand what you mean by the groundwater. Groundwater is the water in the underground aquifers, and it is the source of drinking water in many of the areas and for many of the people. Because of the cleansing ability of the earth above the aquifer, groundwater has traditionally been relatively contamination free. So groundwater contamination occurs for certain reasons. It occurs due to leaking of storage facilities on the surface, whether it is a wastage storage sometimes, or it could be a bulk liquid such as gasoline, spill of gasoline liquid, so it will contaminate the whole of the groundwater. Another source in the study and the material and in the text that is given is the leaching of the pesticides and fertilizers into the groundwater. That creates major contamination of the groundwater. There are two types of sources. When you talk about water pollution, we consider there are two types of sources of groundwater contamination or pollution. One is the point source, which is stationary, and the other is the non-point source, which is non-stationary. Point source is the pollution source with clear, identifiable and practically measurable discharge pipes or smokestacks of water pollution. Non-point source, however, is also called as area source, because here there is no particular point or the where the pollution is coming from. You cannot locate a particular point or identify that point. So it becomes an area source, such as urban runoffs, agriculture runoffs, as well as accidental spills, which we have been talking about, accidental spills of gasoline, etc., wastage, storage. So sometimes the storage of the waste that spills and it leaks into the underground water and creates contamination. Now, surface water such as lakes and rivers are the ultimate repositories of most of the deposits which are deposited on land. So, sulfur and nitrogen oxides, which are emitted as the air pollution. Now, one can see how the water pollution and air pollution are also linked to each other. So this interlinkage is sometimes very, very crucial when one is trying to examine the impacts of pollution or the quality of environment on economy or health or any other aspect. So one should see the interlinkages, and that will help us understand how the entire system of climate change and the impact and the economics is working across. So in this discipline of economics, since it is an environmental economics lecture, one should understand the intricate chemistry lying between it and how the linkages of the environment happening, so the science happening within it, and then we see how this interlinkages can affect the monetary aspect of economy. Sulfur and nitrogen oxides emitted as air pollution are ultimately deposited on land, either in the dry form or in the acidic precipitation. Lakes and rivers throughout the developed world, they suffer from the excessive level of nutrients from the agriculture runoffs, and therefore also responsible for the acidification. So as more and more modernization has happened, so we have been using to a large extent, and there has been extensive use of chemicals, fertilizers across to have a better product, to grow efficiently, to have commercial farming. So it has led to another problem of water contamination. Acidification makes the lakes uninhabited for most of the species such as fish. World's oceans are beginning to experience severe pollution such as Baltic and Mediterranean seas. Now, another source of quality of environment, or another component of quality of environment, is considered as toxic chemicals. These have been the problem for decades. Pesticides, they find their way into the food chain and they cause havoc, and with the wild bird species and the cycle of the entire food chain cycle gets disrupted, and most persistent pesticide which has become the cause of all this is DDT. It has been banned for decades. These have still very significant discharge of heavy metals and other toxic chemicals into the aquatic environment, even in the developed countries. They have to tackle this particular problem again. Another toxic problem of human health is considered as lead. So during this century, the most significant source of lead poisoning has been the air pollution, and to the matter of fact that it is due to the lead of the motor fuels. So the emission coming out to air from the automotive vehicles, it carries lead, and that becomes the cause of the health damage. Lead has been blamed for serious health effects such as mental retardation, particularly in the poor urban children. Lead has been a major air pollutant because of its use as a performance enhancement of the automobile fuel. So basically it increases the efficiency of automobile vehicle, and that is why it has been blended in the gasoline, and that becomes the cause of major concern of health impact. Most of the developed countries restrict or they ban the use of lead in the automobile fuel. There are two major sources of toxics: old toxic waste sites and accidental discharges. Toxic waste do not rapidly decay, they do not disappear from the system because they are toxic, and if they are being emitted or discharged in the system, they will stay in the environment for a long period of time, and they become and they stay forever. Most of the time they stay. Some of the abandoned industrial sites from 17th century are still considered hazardous. So if we consider industrial revolution, so the emissions and the and the wastage generated from that particular time has remained in the system till now. Many sites of nuclear, mining and chemical waste from the post-World War period, World War II, but before 1970s, it has been there in the system. Moreover, the accidental spills, including oil spills and chemical spills, will always be with us till the human race is there. So most of the forgiving environmental problems such as air, water, toxic chemicals, sometimes they are all referred to as the term which is very, very common and now very popular, brown issues. So you would have heard about this term, brown issues, most of the time in most of the papers and news and everywhere. So what are brown issues? It is basically the environmental problems related to air, water and toxic chemicals which the entire human race is surrounded with in the present times. And they are basically the pollution which are generated from the industrial sources. These are environmental concerns and issues which do not directly involve pollution in the conventional sense. However, there are certain issues which are called as green issues. What are the green concerns? These are the natural environment we all live in and we all depend on, and as well as we all benefit from. So the issues which are related to the natural environment we all live in, those are concerned as green issues. As population pressure expands increasingly, the world is turning its attention to more of green issues. Green issues, what are they? They take care of the health of specific species of animals, plants, ecosystem, which are consisting of interconnected species of animals and other plants. So all the green issues will take care of the survival and as well as sustenance of these species, which are natural environment. Rapid rise of Earth's population has inevitably placed the great strain on the wild ecosystem. Wild ecosystem is the naturally given ecosystem around us, not man-made environment. It is basically given by nature. So concerns of health of an ecosystem motivated the massive global Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, also called as, it was basically a United Nations project which began in 2000 to assess the consequence of the ecosystem. So whatever the man-made environment has brought about an impact on the natural ecosystem, that has to be evaluated, and for that the project began in 2000. The total expenditure in United States. Now let us talk about the cost of environmental protection. We've seen what the damage has been done and what is going on in the present times, what type of damages one can think of, and what are the sources of damages of quality of environment. Now let us just talk about the cost of the environmental protection. The total expenditure in United States on pollution abatement and control by industry in United States is approximately 2% of GDP. These are direct costs to the industry from the pollution control regulations. Many components of the cost are omitted while measuring these costs. For example, process charges that are induced by the environmental regulations, that are omitted. Cost of operating bureaucracy and administers environmental laws, that is avoided. Indirect costs such as cost of pollution control on automobiles, that is also not considered. So costs associated with having to use environmental friendly products such as inferior quality in other respects. This involves bans on oil based paints, etc. Cost of the society of residual damage from the pollutants, that are emitted, even all those controls put together, these have also been ignored. These costs of pollution abatement are relatively modest compared with the cost of other socially desirable activities. Even then, we can see how much is the cost. It is 1/6 of the GDP in US. The healthcare impact that is being spent on as a part of GDP is 1/6 of GDP in US. Total expenditure is not the correct measure of impact of environmental regulations actually. The better measure is considered as marginal cost, the cost per unit of output, which we as economists, we use the marginal cost to identify the optimal amount of pollution or optimum amount of taxes or the fine to be imposed. The petroleum and the coal products or industry is considered to be the hardest hit. The chemical industry is the second hardest hit. Petroleum and coal product industry devotes around 16% of its capital expenditure to the pollution abatement. Having identified which industries are most polluting, it becomes necessary to determine the total cost of control over all these industries which have been identified as the major industries which get impacted. The pollution abatement is consistently between 1% to 2% of GDP, and in most of the developed countries. The cost of pollution control devices on automobile is included, but we do not include the cost of the reduced automobile performance due to the pollution control regulations. So there are several estimates of costs of pollution control which lead to about less than 3% of GDP, but this excludes the damage of environment. These are only the cost of control. Pollution control regulation reflects two things: the cost of pollution control and unnecessary inefficient regulation. This implies that while pollution control regulation may cost a few percentage points of GDP, a much higher level of environmental quality could be achieved by the same cost. Efficiency of environmental regulation is the point of issue. So this part we have understood few points, that air quality, water quality and toxic chemicals are important to assess the quality of environment. The brown and the green issues are distinguished adequately to comprehend the ecosystem and natural environment, and the cost of environmental pollution have been adequately discussed. So we'll take a short break here and we come back soon. Thank you so much.